in African countries, there's breast ironing. In Pakistan, there's honor killing, right? And then when you went to give these workshops, did you have a chance to like talk about these? Were there... Just talking about the Nirbhaya case, I remember I was in 5th, 6th grade.
Yeah.
And
you still remember that moment?
I still remember. I still remember the details.
Yeah.
I still remember the details, and every time that, even while I was like researching for this interview, and I was like, okay, let's revisit the Nirbhaya case, and I think for any woman, and it's just like, it doesn't matter like what nationality, how old you are, to read that case and not cry is hard.
One of the issues in war is there's a ton of human trafficking that happens because people have lost their homes, they don't have their families, support systems to protect them anymore, they don't have the safety nets, and they're sort of left stranded. And that makes up so much room for exploitation. When I was younger, I think I had to unlearn a lot of internalized misogyny, which I think a lot of women have. When I was younger, I was like, ew, like I don't want to talk about like menstruation and like women's issues. That's so gross. And flip over to like right now, and I'm like a staunch advocate for like women's rights.
Yeah.
And so it took me a lot to like learn and grow. And I think had I been canceled when I was younger, like still a child, you know, in kindergarten, being like, ew, I don't think I would have ever flourished into this place. And I definitely think we need to continue giving people that opportunity to revamp themselves.
Welcome back to another episode of Flipping Founders. My name is Khushi Sethi, and I'm really excited for you all to see the next episode. I hope you find it helpful. Enjoy the show. In today's episode, I am thrilled to have Vedanshi Vala, the co-founder of Bold Safety Society. Bold Safety Society is a Canadian non-profit organization that has been making waves in the fight against sexual violence, domestic abuse, and harassment since its inception in 2020. Recognized nationally by the Loyal Paris Women of Worth program, and has advocated for gender equity at the United Nations headquarters in New York. They have also collaborated with the Princess Diya Kumari Foundation in Jaipur. Vedanshi and her team have been instrumental in driving meaningful change against sexual violence. Today, we dive into Vedanshi's journey, the mission of Bold Safety Society, talk about the stigma that surrounds sexual violence in India, and the importance of combating sexual violence worldwide.
Vedanshi Vala, welcome to Flipping Founders.
Thank you, Khushi. It's great to be here.
Perfect. Now, jumping right to the first question, what led to the creation of Bold Safety Society, and what need does it aim to address?
So what we realized was that, first of all, the reason we created the organization was because, you know, as young students, we came across the statistics that 1 in 3 women had faced some sort of violence in their lifetimes. And so we started wondering what we could do to make a difference. And then what we realized was that there's a ton of organizations already working to make a difference. There are women's shelters, there are crisis lines, there are police officers and public safety professionals, you know, healthcare providers. But what we felt was lacking at the time was something to centralize all of that information and access to all of those resources. And so we started by creating our digital platform, and the rest is history.
Perfect. And then can you tell me a bit about the programs that you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to say we're a tech startup meets nonprofit. And if you watch any of my interviews, I say this a lot. The reason for that is because we created that digital platform, and then we developed a bunch of programs sort of tangential to that. So one of them is our Safe Hubs program. It's a network of safe spaces in partnership with local businesses. We're currently actually at 40 locations in 16 communities in Canada, so we've expanded quite a bit from when it started. And the other program that we have is our Project Lightning workshop program. I'm actually currently on tour up to different cities in India delivering workshops for that program. And that program in particular I think is really impactful because we're bringing educational awareness and knowledge directly to people in the community. It's always great to connect with people in person as well.
And what impact have you been able to make in the communities that you have visited and where Bolt operates?
I think that if we're looking at it from a numerical perspective, perspective, we've had an impact on over 24K people so far, and that's counting the clients that have used our Safe Finance program, or the people that have accessed our Safe House map, or the people we've delivered workshops to. So all of that, accounted for. And then if you look at the soft impact, I guess, like not the metrics, one really touching story for me was we were in Jaipur 2 years ago delivering workshops, and one of the girls actually came up to us. One of our co-presenters was a medical doctor.
Right.
And so she came up to us and said, "This is the first time I'm standing next to a female doctor." And so just to be able to show girls that they can do this, they can achieve whatever they set their minds to, it's moments like these that make me feel like it's making a real impact.
Yeah, and what do you think sets Bolt apart from other organizations, that want to combat sexual violence and harassment and domestic abuse?
Yeah, I think that, we don't claim to be the experts in
Right.
the field, actually, and I think that's what sets us apart in a way, because what we're saying is that there's so many organizations that are doing this work already. Why not find a way to centralize all of that? And as young people, we're so tech savvy, we're the tech generation, and why not use it to make an impact? And so by bringing the tech sector and the nonprofit worlds into one space, I think we're building something that's quite unique and quite meaningful in that sense.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And now talking about your recent project in the making, the documentary.
Yes.
Tell me more about the documentary. Why did you want to make a documentary? What objective do you want to achieve with it?
Yeah, so the documentary, it's definitely one of the most, I would say, exciting projects we've worked on to date, because we've never really done something to this scale before. And I think it started when I was at the UN last year, and I met with a government leader from Kenya, and she invited us to come to Kenya to explore if we could bring our work on ground locally. And so we started thinking about, okay, so yes, Bolt can just go and expand, but we need to take a moment to step back and understand what the issues currently are, as well as the work that stakeholders are already doing in this space.
Right.
And so the documentary really aims to do that, is identify and highlight the realities of these crimes in different communities in the world, showcase and amplify the work of all these amazing stakeholders, as well as assess, what needs to happen next. So comprehensively, that's what we're aiming to do.
Right. And so far, how many places have you visited?
Quite a few.
Quite a few.
Countries. We did Kenya. We did a bunch of places in Canada. We're in India right now.
Yeah.
And we're, within each of those countries, we've gone to a lot of different communities. And so in Canada, for instance, we were fortunate to get a grant, actually multiple grants for this project. And so we were able to take our team from Metro Vancouver, where we're primarily based, to the East Coast. So we went to Toronto, we went to Ottawa, and then we also went into rural communities in BC.
Okay.
And a lot of times when people are doing all this programming, it's centered to urban centers, which does mean that a lot of people are underserved in more rural areas. And so we went up to Squamish and Whistler and Pemberton. One of the unique things about the project actually is, in parallel to interviewing these NGOs, we're also expanding our Safe Hubs network in each of these communities that we go to where possible. And so it does mean that we're growing our impact geographically as well.
Yeah, no, I love that. And let's now talking about Canada first.
Yeah.
When you went there and when you visited survivors, what did you find out from like the difference between urban and rural and let's say the Canadian stories? What insights did you gain from that?
So in Canada, we're very fortunate to have a lot of resourcing compared to Kenya or India even.
Right.
In India, the challenge is that the population is so big. How far can your resources even stretch? In Kenya, there's just such a lack of resources, and I've seen people be so resilient and try to make the best out of what they have, and they're doing amazing work. And I think that actually having less resources makes you more innovative to an extent, because you got to make do with less and make more happen. And then in Canada, I think there's a lot of government level support provided.
Right.
A lot of the funding is distributed by the government, and there's a lot of funding in that area. So a lot of nonprofits are working in their different specializations. And one of the things I learned actually is there isn't just one type of form of sexual violence. There's human trafficking. We spoke with a shelter actually that focuses on supporting survivors of human trafficking. And then on the other side, we're working with nonprofits that respond to people who've experienced trauma in rural communities. And the needs are so different because of many different factors. And so just learning how well coordinated it can be across the country, it's really inspiring, honestly.
Yeah, I love that. And was there a moment when, you went there and you just felt like, this like sudden like ache in like your heart, like, whoa, like this also happened, and it's just any moment like that when you spoke to like the survivors, and it's like maybe you had tears in your eyes, or maybe you felt like this is not okay?
I think that I would go to Kenya actually for this. We visited a shelter that supports teenage mothers, and a lot of them have become pregnant as a result of sexual assault. And so being in that room, it's, we do a lot of training around building a personal safety plan and whatnot. And in that moment, it just didn't feel right to talk to them about that without addressing, and we do this for all our workshops, but I thought it was especially important for this one to address the systemic issues and how it's not the fault of the victim or the survivor, and that they have the ability to like overcome whatever has happened to them. And so, after the formal workshop, I sat down to chat with some of the women and the girls in the shelter, and just heard their stories one-on-one, and I'm grateful I was able to spend time with them for that, and I truly admire the resilience that they have. But it just goes to show that who talks about teen moms, right? Who talks about teen moms and the struggles that they go through? But here are this community that they've built. That was definitely tough.
And did these women have access to abortion? Could they have gotten an abortion done if they didn't want to keep the child? Or was that something that was not, available, or not something that was easy to get?
Yeah, I mean, it's an important point that you brought up about abortion, because abortion is a healthcare right for sure.
Right.
I didn't get a chance to specifically address that with this shelter, but I think that definitely ties into Roe v. Wade, which we saw happen in the United States. And I think that it's really disappointing to see a modern progressive society make these kinds of legislative changes, because what does that say about the rest of the developing world, right?
Exactly. No, I think I remember I was in India only, and then I just saw the news, and by that time I didn't know like what Roe v. Wade was, because I know Indian history, I don't know American history, and then I looked up, and I had like tears in my eyes, because I was like, if countries like that are gonna do this, then I don't know like what the developing countries are gonna like. What does their future look like? And I know they're still like fighting, and they're still like protesting, and there are obviously people out there who every day are risking their medical license just to be able to make sure that the kid that comes in, like the kid doesn't have to come into the world if the mother cannot afford the kid.
Yeah, and I mean, like, as someone that I want to become a doctor one day, and I can't imagine being in a position where I have to choose between the profession that I love and maintaining basic human rights and dignity. And I think that medicine as a whole is a humanitarian profession.
Yes.
And I'm honestly pretty disappointed to see that this legislative change is interfering with doctors' ability to be doctors. So,
exactly, because I think when you think of like doctor, you're just like, they save lives.
Yeah.
They save lives. And it's like having a kid, if you I also read this thing that sometimes people who've been through like sexual assault and then they have a kid, and then sometimes they might also not be allowed to have an abortion. And it's just like, okay, so young women are like raped, beaten up, they're like forced into like prostitution, then they're forced to have kids that they don't want or they can't support, and as women, what do we do about it?
It's really disappointing to see that that's what happened, but it's not surprising, because I think that every time, if you observe historical trends, every time that there's some kind of feminist movement or some kind of change, sometime back there's like, or sometime
a
later,
shift.
there's a shift. It goes back, and so it's always back and forth.
Yeah,
so you just gotta keep fighting the good fight,
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And then talking about different practices, like in African countries there's breast ironing, in Pakistan there's honor killing, right? And then when you went to give these workshops, did you have a chance to like talk about these? Were there like women who wanted that young girls to have like that like breast iron just to like protect them from men?
I mean, I think that the limited time that we had in the workshops or the interventions that we did, we didn't specifically address those practices, but
Right.
what it boils back down to, honestly, which is what we did address, is the concept of consent and bodily integrity. Because the whole like notion of like breast ironing in Africa is so that women seem to be less seductive or desirable by men and boys. And this just perpetuates the narrative that a woman is to blame if an assault happens to her because she invited it, which is so not the case.
Exactly.
And so the moment we start understanding that concept, then I would hope that these sorts of practices, which are a form of violence, gender-based violence, are starting to be removed. Female genital cutting or mutilation is another example. That happens with the Dawoodi Bohra community in India, as well as in some communities in Kerala. We worked with Sahio, which is an amazing NGO based in India that does that work. But yeah, it really boils back down to why are women's bodies seen as sinful, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that it also just like, you know, if somebody has like if I know a person and if somebody has like a car crash, right, and if somebody who's gone through an assault, people are treated differently.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's like, was the car crash that person's fault? No. If somebody else's car came and hit that person, how is that his fault? And the same thing with sexual assault.
Yeah.
So then why do we not see it in the same way? And that especially in developing countries. What did you find out when you were researching, when you were talking to people in developing countries, that why is this seen as like a woman's fault, you know? And also this, you know, this sort of like misconception that, oh, like she's asking for it. And it's just like, I don't think any woman in this world would ask for her body to be like torn apart and, you know, for like a man's temporary pleasure. So why is this like thing still there that, oh, it's like the victim's fault?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly goes back down to like different mindsets, and there needs to be some kind of a widespread shift in that way of thinking and all of that. And you see that with a lot of traditional conservative systems for sure.
Yeah.
One thing that I definitely noticed was you know, when you're looking at socioeconomic differences between men and women, why is the boy child given greater opportunities for academic success? And that's going to translate into the kind of jobs that kid can get later. Versus the sister is like, okay, your education is not important, you're going to get married anyways, you just need to be a housewife, you just learn to cook and clean. And I think that, you know, from that point on, girls are made to think that they are less than. And I think that the moment we change that and parents treat all their children equally, and then, you know, just see how that changes the way they perceive themselves, the way they perceive others. And I think that's really going to make a difference for sure.
Yeah, and I think it also make a difference because if like the mother is educated, if the mother is independent, if there's an equal power dynamic, they can also raise strong women. You know, like if a woman has been through so much, whether it's, you know, like domestic abuse or just not being given equal opportunity, it's going to stay with her, and it's also going to affect her parenting. So, and then it becomes like a vicious cycle, and you're just like how do we stop that?
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, breaking the cycle is really important, and there's so many people working in this space to break that cycle. So as an example, like a mental health, you know, like a professional, a therapist is there to intervene with that cycle to make sure that mother is able to overcome that trauma. Because she's certainly more than what happened to her, right?
Yes.
And then be a really amazing mother who raises some very loving, kind, considerate children. So it's definitely possible. And, you know, I know a very close example to me, like the mother experienced domestic violence, but she's raising the most beautiful, you know, happy, loving family on her own. And so success, that can definitely happen in parenting. It's just, it takes a community to come together to break that cycle for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And just following up on that, how do we get the community together when a community doesn't want to talk about it?
Ooh, okay, so we gotta break the stigma around talking about, you know, yes, sexual violence, sexual assault, these are heinous crimes. We can establish that. So I'm not saying, let's talk about it because it's like no big deal. It's a big deal. It's a big problem. And that's why we've got to talk about it. So as a simple example, right, if parents see, especially in India, right, if your kid comes home with a C or a B grade, you're probably going to spend a few hours talking to them about their study habits and what they could have done better. I honestly think that we should be translating that same level of intervention into their behavioral and emotional development as well.
Yeah.
So if you see that your child is being disrespectful or is violating other people's boundaries, then from a young age, it's the parent's responsibility to intervene or the teacher's responsibility to intervene, right?
Right.
And so it's about taking responsibility and making sure we're nurturing an upcoming generation that understands what it means to ask for and respect someone's consent and boundaries.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we start at home, we start at school, and it'll happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. And just talking about consent, right? Because I think that is when, you know, when you read about cases and when you like talk to people who've gone through, you know, like sexual violence and you're just like, oh, like, and then one person's like, no, I said no. And then the guy's like, oh, but I thought no meant like a yes. So it's just like, and it's really simple. Consent is really simple. It's either a yes or it's a no. So what do you think is the kind of like fuss about it? How does it get bloody when it's actually like so simple?
Yeah. Well, I'll give a very simple example, right? Consent is quite simple.
Yeah.
If you have the ability within you to respect yourself and respect other people. So let's say that there's someone that has from a young age been taught that you're the best, you know, you should get everything you want in this world and don't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
And if the, you know, maybe the parents are making this child feel like, oh, if you don't win an award or if you score less, you're a less than person. So you're, you know, connecting achievement with personal ego or personal sense of achievement.
Self-worth.
Self-worth, exactly.
Yeah.
And so when that child grows up and they try to get into their first relationship, and then someone says, no, I don't want this, they're not going to attribute that no onto like themselves, right? Like, oh, this person doesn't like me or is being disrespectful towards me. But it's not about you. It's about the other person and what they're comfortable with and their boundaries. So the moment, and I'm, you know, taking this example from a workshop I attended, it's important to keep educating yourself as well. The moment that people stop putting their own needs above someone else's, that's when we're going to have a society where there's a culture of consent.
Yeah, no, you're right. And tell me about, you know, what insights did you gain from like having done workshops in like, let's say like an underdeveloped place, a developed place, and now like a developing place. Like you've got all of this figured out and you can see exactly like, you know, what are they thinking? Like what are their assumptions? What's their like common pattern of like thinking? So what similarities and differences did you find in the stories?
I think what I've learned is there's so much humanity in the world, and I think a lot of people tend to get quite pessimistic because they're like, oh, the world's going to burn down, and there's so many crimes happening.
That's social media.
Yeah, absolutely. Social media definitely does that to you, but it's just like, I think if you take a moment to disconnect from your phone and actually just walk out on the streets and take a moment to talk to people that you've never spoken to before, maybe people in very different circumstances than you, you'll find that, like, honestly, most people just want to be safe and to be happy, to have food to put on the table.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, I think everyone just wants to feel safe and empowered, and that's what ties us all together.
And loved.
Yeah, and loved, absolutely. No matter like what part of the world that you're in. And I think the moment that we remove this notion of like them versus us, especially like coming from North America. Like North America being like, oh, like we're the developed country or like we're the developed world. In fact, European and North American countries are some of the largest places where you're going to see human trafficking happening, because that's where people have buying power. And so, you know, it's not like we're scot-free in North America or Europe. And so I think the moment we stop putting certain, you know, countries or people on a pedestal, and we recognize that we all have the capacity to do bad things, but we also have all of us have the capacity to make good, safe choices and be safe people. And so I think the moment we recognize that, we'll see that honestly everyone in the world's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, because statistically there's so many more studies done on violence experienced by women, and a lot of more women come forward, there's a misperception that violence doesn't happen to men. And, you know, it could look different than what happens to women, but it's not that it doesn't happen. In fact, I think globally 1 in 6 men and boys experience some kind of violence, and 1 in 3 women do. And so again, consent must be given sober, it must be given willingly, it needs to be given without being like forced, it needs to be informed, needs to be specific. If your consent isn't meeting like all of those, then it's not like valid consent. You can't be, in India the age of majority is 18, so anyone under the age of 18 isn't legally able to give consent to any sort of sexual activity. And so if a child gives consent, it's not like...
That's not consent.
It's not consent, yeah, exactly. Or if someone's drunk and gives consent, that's not consent. Or if someone gives consent to like, I don't know, like handshaking, and you give them a hug, that's violating the consent they gave. Because it's not specific to just handshaking, right?
And tell me one thing, while you were giving all those workshops, how did you, let's say, program your, let's say, like your workshops so that the content that you're giving and then the way that you're teaching, it's culturally sensitive to the communities that you're serving?
That's a really important point, and we actually worked with nonprofits on ground. So we work in partnership. So in Canada, we're able to deliver workshops solo because most of our team is from Canada. We also consult a lot of experts in Canada to make sure that our materials informed and grounded in what the experts are saying.
Right.
Abroad, we definitely work in partnership with NGOs that have their roots on ground and understand the cultural context, and so we're invited as guests to join them. And what I found is that provided you do that, provided you're willing to listen, because we have so much to learn from the NGOs that are on ground in these different communities, there's always ways you can come together to work together. So,
yeah, and then I also want to ask you that what are some of the, let's say, lifelong impacts that people who've suffered, people who've gone through trauma, people who have gone through domestic abuse, sexual violence, that they suffer?
So in India, I was looking at the statistics published by the National Crime Records Bureau, and there's a whole list of crimes, crimes against women. So this includes acid attacks, this includes sexual assaults, as we say rape, that's form of sexual assault. Other forms of sexual violence as well, and so you can't, I think, even begin to fathom, as someone that's not experienced it, what that lifelong trauma is going to be like. There's mental health consequences, there's physical, medical consequences as well. People die from violence. People are left with irreversible trauma. Actually, the IPC, so the Indian law, states specifically that there's a clause on if a sexual assault leaves the victim in a state of like a vegetative state, so like paralyzed. So just think of the amount of physical injuries that can be caused, right? So that's someone's career ending, that's someone's life dream and goals ending. Obviously, they've felt that their bodily integrity was violated. And especially I find that in India there's so much shaming. That it's like the survivor is the one that needs to be hiding in shame when it should really be the perpetrator who's held accountable. And so just think about all the social bonds that this person's now going to be losing, or if they're becoming an outcast because, she's that kind of woman, or like he's that kind of a guy,
She's not pure.
Yeah, she's not pure. Can we stop being obsessed with that too, right? Like, hello, Indian society, please. But yeah, I think there's a lot of devastating consequences beyond what just happens in those initial moments of that violence. Yeah,
and then how do you help those survivors move on?
Yeah, so everything that a survivor does from the point of the crime onwards should really be in their hands, because at the time of the assault, their choice was taken away. And so as an ally, as someone who wants to support them, you can potentially refer them to professional resources like crisis lines or mental health providers. You can, if it was a sexual assault, for instance, you can ask them if they need to go to the hospital for a forensic examination or to get treated for any injuries that they have as well. And also the medical examination is separate from the police report, so someone can choose to get healthcare without choosing to file a police report, and they can choose to do so at a later date. India doesn't have a statute of limitations on filing a report for sexual assaults. So there's that, and there's a lot of ways that you can start helping someone along that journey.
Yeah, no, I think it's important. And now moving on to helping them socially, in a place where I think there are a lot more social punching, like a punching bag, than there are other things. How do you help someone socially? Like if it's if it's your friend, or if it's just someone that you know of, how do you help them? And how do you know if they need help? You know, I think because that's tricky, because then sometimes you think, like, I'm a woman, something bad has happened to another woman, I should go out and support her, but then, and then sometimes it's like, oh, like, that's a private thing, and like there's, and then there's sort of this denying that, oh, nothing will happen with me, and how do you deal with that?
That's actually a really good point you brought up, because going back to the whole thing on giving choice and all that, it's always about respecting the boundaries and the consent that person gives you. And so sometimes that's simple as, do you give me consent to talk to you about this topic? And see if they're in a place mentally to even address it, or if they feel that it's an issue, because if it's not, you don't want to be naming their experiences for them. And so you always want to mirror the language that they're using. So someone might choose to say, use the word rape. Someone might say assault. Someone might say bad touch. And so you don't want to be like, if someone says bad touch, you don't want to be like, oh, that's assault.
Or rape.
Or rape, exactly. And so you want to be careful with the wording that you use to mirror what they are saying, because that's respecting the boundaries that they're setting for themselves. And there's we have on our platform this training program provided by L'Oreal Paris on active bystander intervention. It's called Stand Up Against Street Harassment. And one of the key components of that is, you want to get in touch with, before even trying to become a bystander, like, make contact with the person that is actually in question and see if they want your help. So don't assume things. It's just, again, boils down to consent, even in this situation.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
No, but I think asking for consent is going to be a lot better than just, like, even with helping, like, I want to help you, like, do you need my help? Is there something I can help you with?
Or even like, hey, if you need help, I'm here for you. And then leave it to that person to come to you, as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, and I want to ask you this now. Looking ahead, after COVID, there was a lot of increase in sexual violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, all the crimes went up. What are some of the challenges that we're facing today? And sort of like emerging trends, when you're thinking about like the fight against sexual violence?
One of the areas of violence that I definitely think has taken an uptick in the recent few years, and potentially that's because we spent so much time, in front of a screen.
Right.
Why exactly? But the development of AI and the lack of legislation around regulating the use of artificial intelligence has certainly made it so that there's a lot of crimes happening. There's deepfake, which is where you replace someone's face onto some sexually explicit video. There's instances where parents are getting calls from people being like, hey, send me money because I have your kid, and it's the kid's voice in the background. So all of those things are happening, and especially for women that are in the public spotlight, public figures, politicians, social justice advocates, anyone that's really in the public sphere are also subjected to a lot of cybercrimes, like cyber harassment, bullying, and people are just told to take it because that's just the way it is, and you chose to put yourself in the public eye. So I think I've seen over the years an uptick in digital crimes for sure.
Yeah, and also talking about this, like when people say, oh, this is something that you chose for yourself, you chose to like put yourself in the public eye. And what I really think about is that they chose to put themselves in the public eye to serve the public. Not to make a fool out of themselves, not to, have no privacy. Like, that's just like that.
I think people misunderstand that the public figure equates the public has the right to know every minute of their life, like what you had for coffee, what time you go to the loo, like, no. I think there's certain personal boundaries that each person should have the right to set for themselves. It's just that their job or role may entail them being in the public eye. But, it's up to them what they choose to share.
Exactly. And I think it's such a sad thing that we see, like even like the kind of like hate online, like if there's a girl and then let's say she's wearing whatever she wants to wear, and there are gonna be like so many of like these fake accounts saying bullshit, and it's just like, well, it's none of your business.
No, honestly, honestly, people should have the right to wear whatever they want to wear. And it's about time that we stop being like, ew, I don't like that. Well, then don't wear it yourself.
Exactly.
You put someone else down for that.
Exactly. No, and I think even with like cybercrime, like cyberbullying, I think we're also it's this really weird thing. Like I've never realized it before. Like I realized it like during COVID. We're all just sitting in our rooms on our phones, and we can know what's happening, and like what is anybody doing at like any particular time, and we don't have time for ourselves, because we can be contacted anytime, and that person wants your attention, whether it's family, whether it's friends, for whatever reason, whether it's your one of your Gmail subscriptions, and just you don't have time to realize, is this right, is this wrong, do I want to be spending this much time? And it's
like you're reducing the time to process what's happening because you're just being bombarded with information.
And then you're numb.
Yeah, you're numb, and that's what happens too.
Yeah.
Like, I just in the workshop I did earlier today, I was giving an example of, people were talking about, okay, if I help out a friend or someone that I witness is experiencing violence, then am I going to be caught up in some kind of a police case because I'm a witness to the crime, right? And like maybe some people are like, I just don't want to deal with all that. I just want to help someone out. And I gave the example that I think the moment that we start being afraid of what's going to happen to us while we're trying to help someone else in need, like this kind of stuff is going to happen. And there was this video circulating on Instagram where a woman was being murdered in public. Murdered, right? Beaten to death in public. People were filming it and walking right past. No one stopped to say anything. No one tried to even like call the police or nothing whatsoever. And we see this human being losing their life in front of us, and what do? We're like sharing it to our stories. We're like, oh, #tragic, but like,
exactly.
No one stopped in real life.
No, I think even the war, after 2020, we've seen wars. We've seen Russia, Ukraine. We've seen Israel, Palestine, and I think Israel, Palestine is the first war I've seen that's broadcasted online. Every minute, who's being killed, who's being kidnapped, how they were taken away, and I can't help but feel like, why do they need to show to like everyone? It's like blur the face, but it's insane.
There's a lot of problematic cancel culture happening. Anytime that someone's speaking out about this particular conflict.
Right.
And I remember, at the end of the day, you could have like no political opinions whatsoever on like, because it's a very complex and nuanced history.
Right.
But you can still recognize human suffering when it's happening in front of your eyes, in front of your screens, right? And I think that it's showing that our society is moving in a problematic direction whenever someone tries to speak out against something that could be mildly controversial, and it's like, oh, they're canceled or they're fired. Like there's so many brands that are rumored to have dropped their ambassadors because they spoke out in support of one side or the other. It just shows that as humans, we're moving in a direction where we're incapable of having these middle ground conversations.
Exactly.
And it is deeply disheartening for sure.
No, and you know what? I've only seen this in the Western world. Over here in India, live TV, we have debates all the time. Normal discussions. We have like every day we have discussions. Because I think when you're, as a normal citizen, you know what I mean? You should know what's right for you. You should talk about politics. You should talk about what your country's doing. It's important. It's your future. Your kids are going to be born in that country. You should be talking about that. But in the Western world, I've seen, it's like, oh no, no, don't talk about politics. That's not a good thing to talk about. Oh, let's not talk about gender because that's a confusing thing. Let's not talk about that. And it's like, well, if you don't talk about the important things, then what are you going to talk about?
No, exactly. It's like, oh, let's talk about how like, oh, water tastes delicious. But,
I know. Let's talk about how to make the best green smoothie. But let's not talk about war. Let's not talk about war ethics and like people dying on both sides. And it's insane.
Yeah, I also think that there's I don't know why it's so hard for people to realize that you can care about like both sides in a conflict. Like especially the Israel-Palestine conflict, like from a humanitarian perspective, there has been suffering on both sides.
Exactly.
Right. And so, I'm not gonna get into like disproportionate like this way or that and stuff, but the point is that I think whenever someone goes like, well, both sides have suffered, everyone's suddenly like, oh, well, you can't say that. You have to be either this side or that side.
It's gonna be.
Where's the gray area?
No, they're gonna be like, how dare you be diplomatic? You cannot be diplomatic with war. But then it's like, it's suffering, and that's on both sides. And no matter no matter their nationality, they're both suffering. And in a war, there are two groups that suffer the most: women and children.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like when I was at the, I was representing both last year. I mentioned that earlier too a bit, but we had multiple sessions, and one of them was specifically on the topic of rescuing refugees from the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
Yeah.
That was like a big, concern. It's still ongoing right now.
Yeah.
But one of the issues in war is there's a ton of human trafficking that happens because people have lost their homes, they don't have their families, support systems to protect them anymore, they don't have the safety nets, and they're sort of left stranded. And that makes up so much room for exploitation because as people are trying to escape the country, as people are trying to get to safety, that opens up so much room for someone to be like, oh yeah, I'll help you get there safely. And then it turns out there's someone with bad intentions. There's also, even in that specific conflict, we literally saw that even Indian students were not given priority in getting out of Ukraine when they were studying there as college students. And so a lot of the European and Western countries prioritized students or people from their nationalities. And this just shows you're valuing one human life over another.
Yeah.
You should be trying to help as many people as possible because at the end of the day, we're all human.
Exactly. And there's one more thing that no matter what we go through, no matter what we go through, no matter what we live, no matter our height, color, religion, caste, I think women share a bond that's really special.
Absolutely.
And that is because we go through very similar things, and it doesn't matter if it's in Vancouver or if it's in New Delhi. It's if I'm talking to someone and it's oh, I don't go out, I don't go outside my house after 10 a.m. I don't walk on the street after 10 p.m. Yeah. That other woman's not going to question it because she knows.
She knows. And
she knows.
You just understand things without even having to say anything.
Exactly.
And the same way that women have this bond or this understanding. I found a lot of times I'll be oh no, that seems kind of unsafe, and then a guy will be how, and I'm you're not a girl, you don't get it.
Exactly.
It is, there's some things, and the similar flip side to that is I think men also have a shared bond because I think for centuries they've been told that they can't show their emotions or that they have to have this specific role in the family or this is what it means to be a man or this is what it means to be masculine. And I found that not only does it take strong women to stand up against patriarchy, it also takes strong men to smash it. Because in my family, I found that, my dad stands up for me so much because it's not very common for, a young girl to go out and travel alone and go to all these places alone, especially from a conservative family.
Right.
And so my parents showing that they have so much trust in me and so much faith in me empowers me to go out and do that. And I just wish that so many more parents did that for their kids and were the safe people their kids need.
Now, moving on to partnerships. You've collaborated with United Nations, the Princess Diya Kumari Foundation. How has partnering with, let's say people who are doing similar work helped kind of in your journey, just your personal journey, learning about, sexual violence in different places? Yeah. How have those collaborations helped you?
Partnerships are certainly the path to even greater progress. And I wouldn't say I formally collaborated with the United Nations, more so I was a representative to the UN. But going there, meeting with representatives of the UN as well as so many different NGO stakeholders, government leaders, other advocates like myself, it helped me gain a more global understanding and perspective on the work that's already being done across the world. It's a really at the Commission on the Status of Women, which is the conference that I went to, you address some of the most disheartening realities globally, but at the same time you also see so many courageous people stepping up to fight that, and it just shows you that there's humanity left. People are still fighting a good fight, and it's really, really nice to put things in that perspective. And then on the other side, working with partners on ground, it helps you gain a perspective because they're so good at what they do. They invested their full time into mastering the craft of what they do. There's an organization that is running a shelter. Hope knows nothing about what it means to run a shelter, but we can speak to them and we can learn from them about their experiences and what it's like to support survivors 24/7, right? That's something we certainly don't have any knowledge about. So it's really admirable to work with all these different stakeholders.
Yeah, no, I love that. I've seen a bit of that, and it's really good. I think the more you go out there and the more you talk to other people, and it doesn't even have to be relate it to like your field. But I think that's just human experience. The more you talk to people about anything, the more you learn, the better you get.
You just want to keep your eyes and ears open, because I think the moment you start thinking that you're the expert or whatever,
that's downfall.
You close off so much. Actually, my mom told me this story when I was younger. There was, we're in India, so I'll share the story. I don't remember the exact names of the characters, but there was this Khushi, and they got the student or disciple. And so essentially the training was to build marble statues, like even like our temples we have, like the bhagwans, like and so or murtiyo, that's what we call it, and so every single time the student would build this statue, the guru would be like, nah, you can do this better, like this is a little bit flawed, and so every time the student would improve, it would keep getting better and better. Then one day the student brought a statue and was like, hey, I just found this buried in the soil, what do you think of it? And the guru was like, oh, it's perfect. And so he's like, actually, I made it. And so the guru goes, you know what? From this point on, you're going to stop growing, because you've already, internalized the thought that you're perfect and you have no need to develop further. Yeah. So the moment you do that, the growth stops.
Yeah. And I think for us especially, like the generation that we're in, the day we decide that we know everything is the day day we're gonna crash.
I know everything. That's the thing. Yeah. Someone that is bent on canceling someone for a mistake they make is actually being quite egoistic, if I'm being honest, because you're assuming that person has no capacity to grow or change.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Yeah. That's the thing, because then it's like, okay, like if I make a mistake, I'll just go and I'll just be like, well, I'm sorry, I'll do better, right? But then on social media, everybody loves canceling each other, and I'm just like, I don't get that. Like, if you cancel everybody out just because of like small mistakes they made, you're not going to be left with a lot of people who have like a voice that other people listen to.
No, exactly. And the thing is, I honestly think that a story of someone that made a mistake and learned from it and, flipped around their mindset and changed the way they do things is so much more inspiring than someone that was, perfect. I do everything, I'm born perfect kind of thing, right? Because in reality, the majority of people have to learn. Like, I'll give my example, right? Like, when I was younger, I think I had to unlearn a lot of internalized misogyny, which I think a lot of women have. When I was younger, I was like, ew, like I don't want to talk about like menstruation and like women's issues. That's so gross. And flip over to like right now, and I'm like a staunch advocate for like women's rights. Yeah. And so it took me a lot to like learn and grow. And I think had I been canceled when I was younger, like still a child, in kindergarten, being like, ew, I don't think I would have ever flourished into this place. And I definitely think we need to continue giving people that opportunity to revamp themselves.
And now moving on to personal questions, and this is my favorite part, one of the favorite parts. Can you share a personal experience that motivated you to dedicate like your life, or how many ever years you want to dedicate to ending sexual violence?
Well, for me it was the statistics for sure. I was like, wow, that's a lot. But I think I also heard from people in my like personal life that had experienced violence, and so as a grade 10 student was when I started what became Bold Safety Society, I just felt compelled to do something that was contributing towards fighting domestic violence, sexual violence, and 2012, which is when I would have been
11?
Like grade 6, grade 7. I think that's around the time that I was involved with like MeToo and stuff in school, and so I was exposed to like human rights issues and topics from that age, and like being part of other nonprofits definitely gave me a good perspective on issues in the world in different spaces like climate and all of that. And I think like at that time I distinctly remember my mom actually sharing this news with me and me being like pretty devastated. So the Nirbhaya case actually what I'm referring to. And so stories like this that you hear, even if they're not related to you, I think resonated probably with every single Indian woman, whether they're living in India or beyond. And so that people in my personal life, so like
and just talking about the Nirbhaya case, I remember I was in 5th, 6th grade, and
you still remember that moment.
I still remember. I still remember the details. I still remember the details, and every time that, even while I was like researching for this interview, and I was like, okay, let's revisit the Nirbhaya case, and I think for any woman, and it's just like it doesn't matter like what nationality, how old you are, to read that case and not cry is hard.
Absolutely.
To read that case and not cry is hard, because I think with sexual violence doesn't see anybody's age, color, income, status. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you are. You could be living in a palace, or you could be living on the streets, and it can happen to anyone. And there is also this sort of like common thinking, like for someone who hasn't like experienced it, like a lot of like, until like it happened to like someone close to me, like I haven't experienced it. I don't know what to like think about it. And from other people I've heard, it's like, you think that, oh, this is something that happens to other people, this is not something that would happen to me, and then it happens to you.
Yeah.
And then your life
it happens to someone you love, but now it's suddenly your
life changes.
Yeah.
And your life changes forever.
Absolutely.
And that person changes forever. And I think with Nirbhaya case, again, we were 10, 11, we're the same age, 10, 11 years old,
absolutely.
and we still know what happened. And I think, her organs were pulled out. And I think the worst part of like all of that was that it happened so close to home. It happened to like my city. And so it's like, that can happen to anyone. And also the fact that, there's this, like any other parent, if it happened to their daughter, they would be crushed. They would be crushed. But then Nirbhaya's parents, that is actually like Jyoti Singh's parents, they said that we can put her name out there, and Nirbhaya actually means like fearless, right? So that is how they wanted to, that's because now when we think about Nirbhaya, we know like, okay, that's the person, and that's fearless, because then till the end, she fought, she didn't give up, and they were like that, we want people to know her name. We want people to know that she did not do anything wrong. It was not her fault. So why should her name be shamed?
Or hidden, or
yes, why would her name be shamed? Yeah. Right? There should be laws made after her name to protect all the other women so that doesn't happen to them. Yeah. And I think the Nirbhaya case was the case that got Delhi the label of the rape capital of the world, and it's just sad to see that.
Yeah.
And
I mean, as it was a very devastating incident that happened, but it's certainly spiraled. I think it's caused a lot of change in India.
Yeah.
Like socially, it's caused a lot of change in India, legislatively speaking and like legally speaking as
yeah.
well. A lot of reforms were made after that case. Like one of them, off the top of my head, is the zero FIR system, which didn't exist before. And the whole idea is that someone that's experienced a crime should be able to report their case in any police station, irrespective of where the crime originally happened. And that is going to be the responsibility of that police station to then pass on and investigate, in their respective region. That's actually a development that hasn't even happened in Canada yet. Like for instance, in Canada, if you experienced a crime in a certain city and you go to like the next city to report the crime, then literally like Vancouver or Richmond, they're gonna be like, oh, you gotta go to like the jurisdiction where like you live or where you experience it. And so I'm like, yo, India's more advanced than you guys on this, and it's sad that it came from such a heartbreaking situation. Yeah. But it also shows that sometimes the developing world is actually advancing in ways that the Western world is sleeping on and doesn't really recognize or realize yet.
Yeah, and as a co-founder, and you've given like so many workshops, how do you maintain the balance between being motivated and resilient to like combat sexual violence worldwide, while also just knowing deep down in your heart that sometimes justice is not served? What's that like for you? What feelings come up for you?
Actually, a mentor, he gave me some training before I went to Kenya, just to emotionally prep me for things that I might see and how to best cope with them emotionally. And so what he said was, sometimes what people do is they go in, they see how bad the situation is, and then they give up altogether. Yeah. But he said, rather than that, maybe if you visit an orphanage, sure, you're not going to fix every single issue that child is going to face, but maybe you can buy a bucket of ice cream and go there and play with the kid for a bit, show the kid some love, and that love might go a long way. I mean, we're just talking about how we remember this case from grade 6, right? So it just shows how much influence the love or the things
lack
that
of
childhood
love.
is close to, has so much impact on them even years later, way into their adulthood. And so, I think I just remind myself that every little thing counts, and I'm not the first, I'm not going to be the last. There's going to be people coming after me. There have been so many people coming before me. I'm just like one more player in this, fight across multiple generations. And so I keep going knowing that it will keep going after me too. And it's kind of like oddly nice to like know that like it's the world's burden is not just
on your shoulders.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And what would be the title of a book based on your life?
Oh, on my life. Wow. That's a very unique question.
I know.
Oh, okay. It'd probably be like The Frazzled Advocate. Because I feel like I like to do like so many different things and like all over the place with a lot of different projects and organizations, and Bolt is the one that I talk about like most publicly, but I'm pretty frazzled, I guess. Like I have my own business where I used to do jewelry, I pivoted into events now, and so you can see that I don't stick to one thing and stuff. So probably that.
I love it. I love it. And any books or podcasts that you like and would recommend to anybody who's listening?
Yeah. Well, I would obviously this podcast. But besides this one, Zian, who you've had on your podcast before, has started his own podcast. He's a good friend. It's the Leaders of Today podcast, and it's a really good listen for sure. There's a lot of amazing stories on there. So that I would recommend. And then in terms of books, I've been reading this. I can't remember the name. It's basically a bunch of women who were in politics came together to co-author this book. It's Women in Leadership.
Okay.
And Leadership, I think. And so that book is a really good read because it talks about women who've gone into these political, high-profile positions.
If you could have a conversation with your future self, what would be one question that you have to ask future Vedanshi?
Well, I'd probably ask, how did you end up overcoming all the challenges that came your way? Because I think in the present day, a lot of challenges seem like they're, you can never get over them. But considering I made it to the future, I'd love to learn how I got there.
And I'm sure you will.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you will get
like,
there.
I read this quote where it's like, you have overcome every single challenge that was thrown your way until now. And so you will continue to do so until,
Exactly. There's also there's one quote I've read, and it's like, to predict the future of a particular person, look at their history. Because history repeats itself. If they have a track record, it's very likely, and this is for people, it's not stocks, it's not anything like that. It's most likely going to repeat itself. And for the last question, a piece of advice that somebody shared, a piece of advice somebody gave you that has, stayed with you all this while, or a quote that you read that you keep really close to your heart.
Especially as someone that's, I do a lot of like media engagements, and my role is to be public as the executive director. So one thing my mom reminds me is remembering why I got started, because it's just so easy to get caught up in the awards and like talking about like the impact you've had and like making, getting an inflated ego. Like I already have a pretty big ego right now. But just remembering, staying humble, and remembering why I got started, and just remembering that there's still so many people that are affected by this crisis, and the fight continues.
I love that. And thank you so much
Thank you
for coming on my podcast. I can't wait to see the documentary and everything else that you're going to accomplish in the future and make world a safer place.
Likewise.